Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Our Own Volition, the official podcast of Volition Comics. I'm your host, Peyton Williams, and to all of our returning listeners, thank you for hopping on for yet another week. And to all those tuning in for the first time, we are Volition Comics Cooperative LLC, and we're going to talk some more about that cooperative part in just a second. We are an up-and-coming publishing cooperative based in Austin, Texas. We publish anything from comic books to novels in all genres, from horror to thriller, sci-fi to fantasy, with the focus these days being on superheroes, especially my series, The Keepers. And I have even more in the works. More on that a little bit later. Today, this is going to be a bit more of a free-flow episode compared to the last couple of ones because, hey, we decided let's go ahead and try scripting our episodes in advance so we don't ramble and so they can be a little bit more concise. This episode, once again, is a bit more free-flow, considering that, hey, another matter actually is I usually try to record these a week in advance. I always try to stay ahead of schedule so I don't have to scramble at the last minute. Well, last weekend, I was out of town, and I didn't have access to my computer. I didn't have access to my microphone, so I had no opportunity to record or script this episode in advance. So I'm doing this literally the night before, off the cuff. And speaking of me being gone over the weekend, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas for two reasons. First of all, seeing my lovely fiancée. We've been long distance, and it was time for us to reunite. It's been a minute since we last saw each other. Number one. And number two, I went to Roots and Remedies, which is a conference of community organizers, advocates, activists, etc., organized by the Praxis Project. People from all across the country were there to talk about how they contribute to, to the legal sphere, for instance, litigation, activism, health, economics, finance, etc. There are a myriad of ways in which we can affect change. For instance, I had the opportunity to visit a community center, the first and only trans and queer community center in the entire state of Arkansas, called Intransitive. Huge shout out to our friends at Intransitive. It was a great experience visiting with them, hearing their stories, learning about the important work that they do. So that was a really wonderful opportunity. And in fact, we gave them a shout out on our social media. I drew them a little sketch of a stick figure with the pride flag behind them and the trans pride flag as the cape. And I said, you belong, love the Volition Comics team. So that's on our social media right now. But beyond that, I also had the opportunity to go to a workshop called, quote, "So, you want to start a cooperative?" And I saw that on the app. I saw that in the itinerary of all the available options that we had because, there were different time slots, this panel, that panel, this event, and workshops. And we had, 5 or 6 workshops at any given time slot to choose from. And at that time slot, that I believe was 3:30 to 5 or something like that. It was 2 to 3:30. It was 2 to 3:30 was that time slot. And I saw that available, and I thought, well, I know a thing or two about co-ops. So I decided to visit with them and have that conversation. And the instructor, speaker, whatever you want to call her, she was from an organization called Co-op Cincy, which is a nonprofit and a network of cooperatives based in Cincinnati. Her presentation was actually quite informative, and before we got to that, she had us introduce ourselves, our names or pronouns, and she asked us on the whiteboard behind her, she had the question, what is a word that describes how you feel about the future of work? And a number of people said different things. Some said hopeful, some said negotiating, some said automation. And I definitely feel the automation part. I definitely feel the automation part, especially my job right now, but I'll save that for my own personal YouTube. Check that out. But the word that I settled on was dystopian. It's actually so funny because the instructor, she heard disco at first. She thought I said disco. And I'm like, no, not disco, dystopian. It's actually so funny because I do have a disco dystopian comic series planned for a little bit later once we have the resources and the time and the space in our release schedule to get that up and running. But it's actually so funny. I do have a disco dystopian story planned, but that's beside the point. So anytime she asked a question as far as, hey, is anyone here a part of a co-op? I have the opportunity to share about, hey, I'm actually part of a co-op. And, I was actually the only one out of maybe, I don't know, 15 of us or so that was part of a co-op. So I felt I was in a position to share more about my experience. For instance, there was a slide about how some states have a special cooperative entity, right? When you file, when you incorporate, that you select that as your option. But in other states, it would be as an LLC or a corporation, which in the state of Texas, we decided to go with an LLC. At that point, you just have to structure your bylaws and your operating agreement around cooperative principles, which so far we have. But still, that requires fine tuning. There are things that we can improve on. There are things that we can learn. And in that sense, it was mission accomplished. I learned a few things. I was so glad that I went to that workshop. I was meant to go to that workshop because it stood out to me. I thought, well, I know a thing or two about that. And I do. But there are also, I went in with an open mind. I wanted to learn. And some of those ideas I brought to, or will bring to my team. And we're going to go from there and fine tune our contract. Well, we called it our contract, in quotes, contract, up until this point. But really, there are bylaws. That's the term that we're going to go with from now on. So yeah, I will say it was a very informative experience. And I'm glad I went. And the reason why we decided when we first started Volition Comics to go with this model, or some variation of it, because no two co-ops operate in exactly the same manner or have the exact same path to ownership, which is another thing that I wanted to learn more about, and I did have ideas on that. They don't always have the same, structure as far as whether it's shares or how profit works, if profit is even an objective at all, and at that point how that's split, as far as if there's a board and how things are delegated, who shares the decision making power, as far as if it's a major decision or a relatively small everyday decision, right? And another aspect of that also is we learned about Mondragon, which is a network of cooperatives based in Spain, which I've heard about before. But as far as this presentation, I was able to learn even more than I knew or I thought I knew. How they have a ratio where, hey, your lowest paid employee and your highest paid employee, there is a set ratio where the highest paid employee cannot make more than, say, 4 times more or 5 times more, or at max 6 times more than the lowest paid employee, right? So at that point, you avoid a ridiculous scenario where in the United States, for instance, you have CEOs making 100 times more, 200 times more, 300 times more, 400 times more than the lowest paid employee. Are you insane? Well, first of all, we're not going to get that big. At least we don't plan on getting anywhere near that big, right? And hey, honestly, our business model isn't even conducive to, becoming that big. But, no matter how big we get, it is absolutely ludicrous to think that, say that I, as one of the co-founders, one of the founders, right? Yeah. I, as one of the co-founders, right? Stick around for 50 years, right? And then here comes this new worker owner. Has only been around for a year. I shouldn't make 300 times more than him. What? Are you crazy? No, that's no. That is absolutely not how we view retaining the fruits of your labor, because ultimately that is what all of this is about. That is why we decided to go with the cooperative model, right? So yeah, bear with me. As you can tell, this is a bit more of a free flow episode. It is in that way similar to the first two, where there was no script whatsoever and kind of went off deep end. But it is a little bit more like the previous few, where, hey, I'm going to be a little bit more concise. I'm going to stick to this topic, and as soon as I catch myself moving to another topic, you know what? I'm going to save that for next time. Now, as someone who's an anti-capitalist, as someone who, well, not just an anti-capitalist, because, that just tells you what I'm against, but as someone who is actively a socialist, right? This is the best that we can do. This is the best that I can do to live those ideals in this system that we have, right? Because the ideal is, hey, not only is there no profit, right? We just abolish that concept entirely, but there's no money. That would be in a communist society. There would be no money, right? But obviously, we are a ways off from that. We are a long ways off from that. As far as this current society that we live in, this is the best that we can do. And moreover, I also want to stress, this is something I've talked about as well, is how we are creator focused, creator based. Power flows up and not down. Because at a company like DC, at a company like Marvel, right? Or, at that point, fill in the blank with any publisher, any big name publisher, right? Whether it's comics or novels or whatever the case may be, right? The publisher retains most of the profit, right? At that point, your artists involved, your writers involved, they only make a relatively small percentage as far as royalties come. Now, if you self-publish, just strictly you and whatever middleman, right, that prints the book, right? You at that point are responsible for your own distribution, your marketing, right? You retain an even bigger share than that, right? As far as how we structure Volition Comics, the idea is, hey, there is going to be a company cut as far as paying legal fees, as far as, paying commissions, etc., etc. Right now it's out of pocket, and that honestly sucks, because we have a GoFundMe out there. If you're able, please donate. That'd be great, but no pressure, right? Because right now, all the freelancers we have, we're paying them out of pocket, and we're going to continue to do that as long as we have to, but the idea is, hey, someday we're going to have the funds where we can pay people out of company funds. So there is going to be a set percentage that the company takes, but it is a much, 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 much smaller percentage. At that point, it's going to depend on the exact calculation. Is it a novel? Is it a graphic novel? At that point, that does change a little bit the percentage between artist and writer, right? But the idea is, hey, those that actively create, they are the ones reaping the benefits, not the company reaping the benefit. Yes, it's the name, it's the identity, it's the brand, right? It's the umbrella under which it's published and released and thrown out there in the world, right? But at ultimately the final rights and the final say-so to any project belong to its original creator. at that point being the head writer slash creative director, whatever you want to call it. We've had different terms in our contract. Well, bylaws, in our bylaws, right? And at that point, whatever artists come on board, whatever they contribute, they will get that fair share back, because we can't do this without them. We cannot do this without our writers, our artists, everyone on board. And as far as the artists go, understand we have storyboarders, we have inkers, we have those doing digital art, we have those doing traditional, we have those doing color, we have, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many different ins and outs to that, right? I can't exactly speak to that. That's why I got to have Aiden back on, or shoot, there's Charlotte, there's Mark, there's Michael, and there's actually a number of freelancers also. Like Alice is one of our new storyboard artists for Wingspan, and she's done some other work too, a few sketches for another project of mine. I have way too many projects going on, but more on that a little bit later once that's ready. But we're cooking, we're working hard, and we're making it happen. We're making the dream happen, guys. But at this point, it has been 16 minutes and 30 seconds. So thank you for spending some time with me as I talked about what I learned as far as cooperatives, as far as how that informs how our next steps are going to be taken in this company, and why we do what we do, kind of the ideals that we bring to the table. And for next week, I'm going to try to have a more concise idea of what to talk about, and some talking points, right? But still, our episodes, tell you what, I don't know how that first episode wound up being 33 minutes and that second one wound up being 50. Actually, it's funny, I did record an episode with Sophie. She is our social media director. And the audio quality was so garbage that we scrapped that. And we're going to have to re-record at some point. Because it was a Discord call. We had to download some third-party software. I didn't have this mic yet, too, and she had her lapel mic and stuff on her laptop, so it was a mess. But take a wild guess how long that one was. An hour and 17 minutes. An hour and 17 minutes. Which you guys are never going to hear. It will never see the light of day again. It was so bad. The audio quality, that is. The conversation was actually pretty good, but the audio quality, maybe in a museum someday. But point is, these episodes are going to be a little bit more concise from now on. They're going to be probably 20 minutes tops, or maybe a little bit longer depending if I have a guest and how that conversation goes. But I think gone are the days of 50-minute episodes, because that's just, who's going to listen to all that, right? Anyway, peace out, guys, and I will talk to you guys next week.